The Prime Minister knowingly appointed a convicted fraudster to be his Transport Secretary. What was he thinking?
Yesterday was supposed to be a moment of strength and strategy for Prime Minister Keir Starmer, but instead, it's turned into what many are now calling a political disaster.
Keir Starmer once stood before Britain promising integrity, accountability, and a fresh approach to politics. His supporters hailed him as the antidote to the chaos that came before. A lawyer, a leader, a man of principle who would restore trust in government. But Friday's catastrophic decision has shattered that carefully constructed image. In just 24 hours, Starmer managed to alienate core supporters, contradict his own previous statements, and reveal what critics have long suspected. The principles appear flexible when power is at stake. So what exactly happened? And can his leadership survive this self-inflicted wound? Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. Remember when Keir Starmer stood before the Labour Party as the principled alternative to Boris Johnson? That image now seems like ancient history. In 2020, Starmer launched his leadership campaign with soaring rhetoric about restoring trust and integrity to British politics.
I'm convinced that if we can show that politics can change Britain for the better, then we can face the future with confidence.
Critics accusing him of dodging accountability and potentially dragging the UK into dangerous territory. So what exactly did he say?
He positioned himself as the ethical antidote to Johnson's chaotic leadership, promising accountability and a new era of principled politics that would win back disillusioned voters. What a difference a few years make. Friday's disaster didn't emerge from nowhere. It represents the culmination of a troubling pattern that's been developing since Starmer took office. The man who once pledged to uphold the highest standards in public life has instead demonstrated a willingness to abandon core principles when politically expedient. His initial promises of transparency and democratic oversight now ring hollow in light of recent events. The Friday catastrophe fits neatly into this emerging narrative of compromise.
Is that because you fear failure?
No, Beth, the way we've constructed it is that there are foundational things that a government must do.
In a joint statement, Farage and NatWest said, NatWest Group and Nigel Farage MP are pleased to confirm that they have resolved and settled their dispute.
Political observers have noted Starmer's leadership style underwent a remarkable transformation after securing power. What began as principled opposition has morphed into something far more calculating. His initial pledges around accountability have been conveniently forgotten when they became inconvenient barriers to political advancement. This pattern of principle shifting has alienated significant portions of Starmer's base. Long before Friday's debacle, he had already accumulated a concerning record of reversed positions and abandoned promises. The Labour left has watched with growing dismay as Starmer systematically distanced himself from previous commitments, seemingly abandoning the very values that won him the leadership in the first place.
She talks about my record. For 5 years, I was the chief prosecutor, prosecuting people who went to prison, many of whom were then deported.
Keir Starmer is facing intense backlash after what many are calling a catastrophic blunder during a high-stakes diplomatic moment in Paris.
Perhaps most telling is the criticism emerging from within Labour itself. How Starmer's leadership has been characterized by what some see as a calculated purge of vestiges of Corbynism, making the party safe from the perspective of capitalism. This internal critique suggests a fundamental reorientation of the party's direction, moving away from more progressive policies to court a different kind of voter. The polling data tells its own story about eroding public trust. While Starmer maintains a slight positive approval rating at +5, according to More in Common polling, this represents a significant decline from earlier numbers. Compare this to Rishi Sunak's dismal -36 rating, and what initially looks positive for Starmer actually signals concerning weakness. A leader of the opposition should be performing substantially better against such an unpopular government, especially given the multiple crises facing the country. What makes Friday's disaster particularly damaging is how it confirmed long-harbored suspicions about Starmer's leadership. It wasn't just a one-off mistake, but the logical conclusion of a leadership approach that increasingly values political expediency over principle. For many Labour MPs and members who had defended Starmer against critics, Friday's decision left them without credible responses.
Is obvious, but border security is equally obvious in my view, and that's why I've said we are committed to bringing down immigration.
On Friday, the Prime Minister made a statement that has not only stunned critics across the political spectrum, but also raised serious questions about the future of Britain's role in the Ukraine conflict.
Union leaders who had cautiously supported Starmer's leadership have grown increasingly vocal in their criticism. Friday's events provided them with unmistakable evidence that their concerns were justified. The reaction from party members has been even more severe, with many questioning whether the leader they elected bears any resemblance to the one now making decisions that contradict his original platform. Political commentators across the spectrum have offered varying interpretations of Starmer's evolution. Some defend his approach as necessary pragmatism, arguing that principles must sometimes bend to the realities of governance and electoral politics. Others see a more troubling pattern of betrayal, viewing Friday's decision as confirmation that power, not principle, now drives Labour's leadership. The fundamental question emerges: does Friday's disaster represent a temporary crisis that Starmer can overcome? Or does it reveal something essential about his character and leadership? Is this a momentary misstep or the inevitable result of a leadership approach that has systematically sacrificed principle for political advantage?
She campaigned to remove the cap on migrant worker visas, and now she pretends she's furious about the open borders policy of the last government.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russia of breaking a ceasefire agreement, launching new strikes on critical energy infrastructure.
For many observers, the answer seems increasingly clear. The Friday catastrophe wasn't an anomaly, but the culmination of a leadership trajectory that has moved steadily away from principles toward power. What makes this evolution particularly striking is how it contradicts the very foundation upon which Starmer built his leadership claim, the promise of integrity and accountability that would distinguish him from his predecessors. What we're witnessing isn't merely a political misstep, but potentially a fundamental breach of public trust. The most damaging aspect of Friday's events isn't the decision itself, but how it solidifies a growing narrative about Starmer's character. This moment risks becoming a crystallization point when suspicions transform into certainties in the public consciousness. For voters who initially supported Starmer as the antidote to political cynicism, this revelation cuts particularly deep. When principles appear negotiable in the face of political expediency, the damage extends far beyond any single policy decision.
I will defend our decisions in the budget all day long. I will defend facing up to the harsh light of fiscal reality.
What happens next? This situation is far from settled. Starmer's refusal to guarantee a parliamentary vote up front has left him exposed to accusations of undermining democracy.
It undermines the very foundation upon which Starmer built his leadership credentials. The question now isn't just whether he can recover, but whether this represents his political epitaph.